The lifeboats on this platform were required to launch while the deck tilted 15 degrees. The emergency generator was required to work at 22.5. Then one steel brace broke, and the deck of Alexander L. Kielland tilted 30 to 35 degrees almost at once. The platform did not immediately sink. It found a wounded balance and stayed there for roughly 20 minutes. So this is not only the story of one bad weld, it is the story of an escape system that crossed every angle in its design before most people could reach it. Picture 5 enormous columns at the corners of a pentagon. Pontoons connected them below the water. Tubular braces tied them together. A broad deck carried accommodation for hundreds of offshore workers above the waves. By March 1980, the rig was being used as a floating hotel beside the production platform Edda. 212 men were aboard on the evening of the 27th. Wind was running at 16 to 20 meters per second. Waves were 6 to 8 meters high. The gangway to Edda had already been lifted. Alexander L. Kielland was on its anchors, separated from the safest dry route away. The first failure happened inside brace D6, a tube roughly 2.5 meters across. Years earlier, a much smaller tube had been welded through its wall to hold a hydrophone. The inquiry found poor fillet welds, weak through-thickness properties in the attachment material, and cracks old enough to contain paint from the construction yard. Wave loading grew fatigue cracks from 2 points around the opening. By the final fracture, those cracks covered about 2/3 of the brace circumference. D6 opened. The 5 remaining braces around column D took the transferred load and failed in rapid succession. One whole corner of the pentagon floated away. That structural failure lasted seconds. The second accident lasted about 20 minutes. With column D gone, the deck rolled to 30 or 35 degrees and paused. A level corridor became a climb. Loose chairs, cabinets, and drilling equipment crossed rooms under gravity. In one temporary cinema, benches, people, and heavy equipment collected against the low wall. In the mess, hot food and loose furniture moved together. Darkness followed almost immediately, because the heel had already passed the operating angle of the emergency power system. Every route, door, and ladder still existed. Their geometry had changed. The rules had tested each part separately. A lifeboat launching arrangement had to work at a minimum adverse heel of 15 degrees. Emergency power had to function at 22.5. The damaged platform settled around 30 to 35. These are not 3 versions of the same number. They are 3 thresholds in a chain. At 15 degrees, the davit requirement ended. At 22.5, the electrical requirement ended. At 35, people were trying to cross a dark industrial deck, while the sea rose toward the low side. The accident did not merely break equipment, it moved the equipment outside the world for which it had been approved. There were 7 enclosed lifeboats, each designed for 50 people on paper. That meant 350 seats for 212 men. But capacity was not the same as availability. Boat 6 sat on the column that had torn away. Boat 2 on the low side soon lay partly in the sea. Boats on the high and adjacent sides faced a different problem. Lowering them brought their hulls toward braces and steelwork, now leaning beneath them. The commission later judged that under these conditions only 1, possibly 2, of the 7 boats could be put into the sea with reasonable safety. Boat 1 carried 26 men. Because the deck was already tilted, it traveled only a meter or 2 before reaching the water. Then the release system trapped it. Both hooks were designed to release together, but they could not release while carrying load. In high waves, the load never stayed off them long enough. Someone pulled the release wire continuously. Someone attacked the forward wire with an axe. The bow hook came free somehow. Waves then smashed the boat against the platform and broke open half the wheelhouse. Through that new hole, a man reached the after hook by hand. The damage created the access that finally let the boat escape. All 26 aboard survived. The boats 3, 4, and 7 were lowered, but the same geometry held them beside the rig. Boat 3 released only its afterhook. The bow stayed attached, so the sea dragged the boat under the platform and threw it back against the structure. Boat 4 was observed lowered and crushed. Boat 7 entered the water at an angle, was forced under, surfaced upside down, and was torn apart amidships. Investigators later found deformed plates around the hooks. On 3 lowered boats, the hooks did not release, and the boats were smashed against the platform. The mechanism had avoided one danger by creating another. A hook that resisted accidental release also resisted necessary release under wave load. At the highest point, beside column B, 14 people entered boat 5. Many others refused because lowering it appeared likely to carry it into the cross braces, so it remained hanging while the platform rolled farther. When the rig finally capsized, the boat reached the sea upside down, its hooks released either through the crew's effort or through their own weight in the inverted position. The inquiry could not determine which. Water came through the wheelhouse windows. People inside and survivors in the sea worked together to right it. 19 more were pulled aboard. Boat 5 eventually carried 33 survivors, but it became a refuge only after the platform itself had turned over. The platform also carried inflatable rafts. Crews tried to release several and failed. Some fell free only as the heel increased, and some inflated when they hit the water. Others were thrown from Edda. 16 people survived with help from rafts, but the inquiry called their use largely accidental. One survivor found the inflation line so long that cold took his hands before the raft opened. He continued pulling it with his teeth. Another reached a raft in a survival suit but could not climb in because water had entered through an unclosed zip. These were not orderly launches from a functioning system. They were improvisations in a sea that allowed little time. After the first heel, water entered column trunks and probably other volumes. That alone was not enough to overturn the rig. Investigators calculated that more than half the deck volume also had to fill through deck drains alone. That should have taken more than an hour. The actual capsize took about 20 minutes. Water must therefore have entered through larger openings, such as doors or ventilators, although the inquiry could not completely exclude openings made by damage. The operating manual called for key doors, hatches, and ventilators to be closed in storm conditions. The alarm plan did not say who was responsible for closing watertight openings. Flooding turned a difficult evacuation into a shrinking deadline. The arithmetic on the equipment list looked generous. 7 boats held 350. The rafts added room for hundreds more. Yet 2 different counts emerged from the accident. The first counted seats. The second counted usable paths to those seats after a real failure. Boat 6 was gone. Boat 2 was low and flooded. 3 boats remained attached long enough to be crushed. Boat 1 escaped through a hole made by impact. Boat 5 became useful only upside down after capsize. Of the 212 men aboard, 89 survived, 123 died. Redundancy on paper had not been distributed across the geometry of the accident. The Commission's recommendations followed that chain. It called for 200% lifeboat coverage because fire, heel, and weather could make roughly half the boats unavailable. It said launching arrangements should work on the low side and adjacent sides at the heel predicted for the damaged platform, not at an unrelated minimum. It demanded better release mechanisms while warning that simple on-load release could drop a boat from height by mistake. It called for reserve buoyancy, tighter control of flooding openings, survival suits, fixed furniture, independent lights, tested escape routes, and training for everyone aboard. The lesson was not to add one stronger component. It was to make every part of escape survive the same damaged state. Most accounts of Alexander L. Kielland end at the cracked weld because that is where the platform began to fail. The inquiry did not end there. It followed the rig through the next 20 minutes and asked a harder question. What did the system become after the first protection was already gone? A brace designed as structure carried an attachment treated as equipment. A platform with 5 columns had no requirement to remain stable after losing one. Lifeboats, power, and flooding controls each carried their own limit. None shared the same accident. Safety is not the number printed beside every component. It is the path that still exists when the deck is no longer level.